Click. And we're live. Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, October 26th, 2021. It is 5 o'clock p.m. on the dot. So far, tech glitches have been at a minimum for my first day driving, but don't worry, there's time enough yet for me to crash.
It's not your first time driving. It's after a long break.
Yes.
It's like
it does feel like the first time though. I was trying to set it up and I'm like, wait, what is this? I had a lot of that. So hey everybody, today is a bit of a weird news day, and also it is a very heavy autumnal themed discussion for Just Us Night.
So I feel like this is the monologue. So GDF, like what, why is it just us and apples? And not cheese. Although
well, I don't know if I could have storage for that much cheese. Fortunately, the apples are pretty okay for right now on the counter. But
so like what happened? But like you ordered like 4 bags of apples and you thought you were ordering 1 apple each.
It is very important to read the fine print, and I mean, I do that for school, and so I read all the footnotes. But apparently, on my Instacart order, I thought I was ordering 4 apples.
Where do you order on Instacart? From
I change it every time because it depends on what I'm ordering, because I'm going for lowest price. So like I will fill out a cart. This is like my insanity in window shopping for groceries in New York City, because it's quite a bit to go out these days for me, like just logistically and then carrying things. And even before that, I was pretty lazy and would order in quite often. But I would price check things to try and not spend $1 billion on just apples. And so part of the thing was the apple bags were priced so low, I thought that they were actually just pricing the apples per pound. And no, I have 4 very large bags of apples. So any and all recipes, Greek chorus, would be greatly appreciated. And Kate, if you have any apple recipes.
Well, it occurs to me that I have many apple recipes, but they all are like lots of labor, like lots and lots. So like you have to peel all the apples and core them. And like it occurs to me that the best way to do this is actually one of those like old fashioned corers. Like, have you ever seen them that hook on the edge of like a counter?
My mom has one. They're fantastic.
Yeah, they're like amazing. And I mean, like you use them literally like for things like this. So I think that like that'll be my baby gift to you. Is I'm just going to get you that. And then I'm going to get you one of those things that you place over the apple and it cores it automatically and puts it in the slices.
The perfect snack. So like the peanut butter and the apples.
But also like that is like you could do both of those things really quickly and then all of a sudden you could just have apple crisp.
Ooh, that sounds delicious. One of the things that I was very intrigued by was I was reading, forget what kind of recipe it was, because what do you do when you're overwhelmed with produce? You start looking on different food blogs, and there were a couple of savory recipes that I thought were really intriguing. And I've never done that. I've always just kind of cooked them as desserts. Like the only recipe that I really am confident in with my appleness is a German apple cake recipe, which is pretty good. So I will share that if anyone is interested at some point.
I feel like when Ben's away and Ben and Scott is away, when Scott is here, it like turns into like writing process philosopher hour. When it's just us, it's like recipe sharing and like grocery shop, like, I don't know, like some type of like Pinterest like version of like in lieu of fun. And then, and like Scott's here is just like full on Twitter shit posting version of in lieu of fun. And then when Ben's here, it's like, well, I was going to say it's like we actually have to pretend like we do a show every single day. But we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have infinite apple recipes. And what kind of apples are they, by the way?
So I thought I ordered, I know for a fact I ordered Honeycrisp, but they got me these pink ladies, which are very similar in look and taste. So I don't know the difference. Like, are there like apple connoisseurs who
they're very, like, they're fine. I mean, they're really like, I think that they're good. I love Macauns, which are really only available in like the fall, and they're very.
They're like a little smaller, right?
Yeah, they turn really quickly and get mealy. But
Yeah.
when they're like really good, they're like really, really good. The Okay, so we have agenda items. One is the weird news
Oh
day
yeah.
today,
Yeah.
in which we literally were like, I was like kind of like looking for guests for us today. I was like, this is such a strange cycle of like kind of nothing and a lot going on at the same time, but none of it feels like super breakouty in terms of news. It's like one of the first slow-ish news days I feel like we've had in a long time.
At least the morning started out that way, definitely, because when I was looking, I was like, oh, okay. And then as the day progressed, I just got pop up on pop up on pop up on my phone, particularly
Well,
about the
because, you know,
Pfizer thing.
yeah. So let's talk about that. So like Pfizer said, what was it specifically? It was that they are approving it, but it's like conditional or it's not fully
It,
approved.
it was just the advisory.
Recommends.
It's just the advisory panel. And so they voted 17-0 because they had one abstention in favor of allowing the Pfizer vaccine to be administered to children from the age of 5 to 11. And it was essentially just saying that the risks of not doing it outweigh the risks of doing it. And so the emergency use authorization hasn't been granted yet, as far as I understand. So they can't do it yet, but it's all like signals ahead, like gear up your logistics, everybody. You're going to need more doses.
But like, have you been following? So we've talked about this before, and I've mentioned this. Like, I follow ever since they created it, the New York Times like maps of hotspots
Yes.
and vaccinations, and like their 14-day change thing, and like, okay, so like I know that, you know, I don't know, that's just kind of was like I started with that, and so that became my like barometer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of getting to this point where I'm kind of seeing like, listen, we have like a pretty high vaccination. Tell me if you think this is crazy. We have like pretty high vaccination rate in the US. We have like I'm seeing some outbreaks elsewhere in the world. Most of the global hotspots seem to have gone away. And like everything seems to be have been declining for quite a while. And I'm kind of like was looking at the long-term numbers, and they're kind of where they were when we had the dip before we had Delta and like we had the spike, but like we're in a different position than we were with kind of Delta and everything else. And so I'm kind of like wondering, well, maybe there will be a spike again in the fall, but like maybe this is like someone said this to me the other day. It moves from pandemic to like endemic.
Yeah.
Like it moves from being like kind of like the common cold and manageable, like sure people or not the cold, but like the flu.
Yeah.
Now it actually maybe is the flu, like in terms of like how much to kind of like if you're vaccinated and you don't get you know, if you're vaccinated and you still get it and everything else. Yeah.
I mean, I would be so hopeful that that was the case. I get very alarmed with the variants of interest or whatever the CDC has labeled the subvariants as, because every time I feel like we start to let our breath out, something new happens, and it's always an odd tension in how much how much we should really fear whatever's out there versus how much we have to persevere in our own lives. And so, I mean, one of the things that also has been freaking me out is so the little guy, he got his first cold to like this week, or at least I think it's a cold. And so your first thought when you see that is, oh God, is this just a cold? And so then you start to have like a little bit of the fear part, and you kind of have to check yourself and be like, okay, let's just go through like what the symptoms are. How do you balance like your rational response versus just panic? And I mean, I feel like that's also something that we have to do for ourselves. And I think for the majority of population who is vaccinated, I agree with you that it will just become like, okay, we have to just deal with this. I mean, if the vaccinations do what they have proven to do, and everyone has less severe cases, then we'll be fine. And it's just an unfortunate thing that so many people have still resisted it. And that scares me more, like, because just the cost of a politicized health issue is not just borne by those who it'll ultimately infect and possibly kill. It's also just by us as a society, and that's also really scary.
Yeah. I think that there's, I mean,
I'm so ready to have a normal life and see people and not worry. Like I would love that.
what do you think is what's holding you back right now? Like,
So honestly, it's all the
like,
stuff that's not COVID. So we're just kind of waiting for the next doctor's appointment because then that's when apparently little babies get their like most of their shots. And so once those are done, I think we're going to be a lot more relaxed. And it's just kind of building him a tiny little immunity.
yeah, of course. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that that makes perfect sense. And like, so you're in like a kind of a unique position, but like, I don't carry even a mask with me. I know, I mean, I like have forgotten it a lot. Like, let's
Yeah.
put it
Yeah.
that way. Like, I have so many in the bottoms of bags, like, I kind of do, but like, I don't even think about it. And like, I know that's going to stress some people out, but like, there just isn't any outbreak in like where I am. And I'm not going inside places still. Like,
Yeah.
I'm still not kind of like, there's just the weather has been so amazing for, wait, why is like John freaking out like Jesus Kate in the chat? Like, I didn't like, I'm not like, I'm triple vaccinated at this point and have and just don't eat indoors. Like, and
Yeah.
so like I just don't bring a mask anywhere, and I do all of my shopping with Instacart. So like I just don't even have like a, I don't know, there's no need for me to, like, I'm certainly not gonna, I don't wear a mask outside. We've all been on that page for a while, right? Like, there's,
I mean, the thing is, we have to follow the science, and whatever the science says, and the science says that it's fine to not wear a mask outside, and it doesn't really give the protection that we thought it did at one point. So,
but like, this is kind of like the Emily Oster point that we had the
yeah,
other day, which is just like, some people think that this is like this like crazy, um like kind of like this absolute like steel guard that protects you in some way, and some people think that like it doesn't do that much. And like, I wear them, I don't even take the subway, or I'm not even
well,
going anywhere still.
no, that's what I was
That's
gonna
the other
say.
thing, is like, I'm still just not going anywhere. Like,
Yeah,
things haven't woken up to that extent. Like, no one's asking me to travel places really.
no,
Or yeah.
no, and like I mean, the subway's a different animal altogether, and it always has been. And I feel like even when things are back to normal, I'll probably bring a mask on the subway just because it smells like pee.
I mean, like,
Like,
that's actually the thing, is like, it's always been I mean, like, oh my God. You remember, I mean, it would just be so like, I just think of some of like the subway rides I've taken where you're just like packed in like sardines and everyone's coughing. I'm like, ugh. And,
mm-hmm.
obviously, I think that there's like, I know that's actually kind of the thing that I wonder, like, are we ever going to go back to a place where we kind of have gotten so aware of the grody-ness of like human existence, and like, and how much we share these germs,
Yeah.
that I think it's hard to kind of walk it back. But like,
Yeah, I used to have a coworker who was a close talker, and she'd come to work when she was like really sick, and she would get in your face, and like you'd take steps back, and you'd try not to, and without fail, whenever she got ill, the entire office would be ill, and that's also like hopefully a norm that sticks. That we're now more aware that like I'm sick, I don't want to get everybody else sick.
I mean, it used to be kind of like an excuse. I mean, that's to a certain extent, like, as a professor, like, I've seen this, like, there were so many excuses, and like, I was just fine with all of them for last semester teaching in person. But I really do think it's going to be really hard. People, like, a lot of people would rather be at home and do in home, not just learning, like, would rather work from home. And they've talked about this, obviously, like how they're going to get people back in the offices. Like, I don't know. Like, I just think that it's like actually quite difficult. But
Yeah,
I don't
no,
know.
I agree with that, and I think that like thinking of it through like a property lens, like you have so much available retail space at this point, particularly in our area. That's just it's commercial real estate. It's open. It's not being used. Like, and what's going to happen with that?
Yeah. No, totally. John, John, John. Hello, John. Sorry.
No, it's
His like
okay.
alarm is going off for some reason. I'm like trying to like make him see it.
No, they had
The yeah, I know. Sorry, you're talking to Andrew, I'm talking to John.
yeah.
there is I don't know. So like, okay, so that'll be, I think, a breath of relief for a lot of people when they have their and when all of this stuff finally goes through. But like, what is the rest of the weird news day for you? Like, what felt weird?
The Kyle Rittenhouse articles. So, and I know Paula had been talking about this a little bit on Twitter. And so apparently during the trial, the judge said that you couldn't refer to the people that he killed as victims because, and there's a very legal reason for that, which Mike Chase was kind enough to explain on Twitter. And that's the only reason why I know this. But it's led to a lot of news headlines that are quite inflammatory, and particularly on the internet. And Twitter is bursting with rage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So no, tell me more.
Oh.
Like, what is like? So hold on. You give us more of an explanation. Like, what specifically did Mike? I'm gonna like look up the thing, but I didn't read this.
No, I'm going to look it up right now because I don't want to misquote what he said. So essentially, the judge said that they can't call the two people that Kyle Rittenhouse killed victims. And so the reason for that was that in order, like prior to calling them victims, they would have to prove the elements of his crime, and to call them victims somewhat establishes the elements of the offense that he's being accused of. And so there's also some other element that I did not completely understand with the judge's ruling, and I haven't I've been a little scatterbrained today. So
okay, so it says, like, I just looked it up. So I'm gonna link to the exchange here, which is super useful. But basically, the judge in Kyle Rittenhouse's trial said that they can't call the two people that he killed victims, and I would imagine that it is because victim is an emotionally laden word, and so frequently, like, judges will kind of draw lines on to like how you refer to people who have been killed. And I mean, this is a pretty standard point. I mean, I think that there's the actual headline that Paula links to. It says that, like, judge says victim is too loaded, but will let others call them rioters, looters, or arsonists. The problem being is that both
those are loaded.
Yes, exactly. That the term, like the term victim and the term looters, rioters, arsonists, this is kind of like are they looters or are they protesters type of thing. Like, are they protesting, or are they or are they criminals? And so Mike's response is just that like using the word victim establishes that you've done some type of analysis that basically to get to the word victim, you would have done some type of finding of fact to see them as such, and that hadn't happened. And he says that that's pretty typical. If you've skipped that part of the trial and haven't done that, or that part of anything, you haven't done that. And so,
and yeah. The judge, once those things have been deemed established, regarding that certain point, can then allow the defense to it can allow them to be called victims at a certain point in the trial, right? Once that's been established, or am I misunderstanding?
Okay, so basically some of there are some specificities I'm not actually even sure what stage we're at here. So hold on, let me just kind of look really quickly. But it's basically, depending on his plea agreement, that there just might not have been things that got fleshed out in the course of a fact-finding trial. And so it says he's going on trial. Okay, sorry. This is I literally haven't even looked at this, but that he's going on trial. And he's laying out. So this is actually, I want to make this point. This is super important. So for those of you who watch Law and Order, or any type of thing in any type of film or TV or a theater depiction of how a trial works, there is almost no evidence that ever comes out in the course of the actual testimony and trial that people are not there. I mean, there shouldn't be, actually, if you've done like all of your work. Yeah. There's no surprises. And more than that, the judge lays out rules during depositions and during the declaring all of your kind of like all of the evidence that you're going to be using, because you have to like have it available to both sides, that basically like that you're not going to, so like they like lay out rules of evidence and how they're going to rule on certain types of things in advance. So there's almost never, unless things go off script in some way or the witness goes off script, which also rarely happens in the dramatic fashion that happens on TV, because they're easily perjurable by their prior sworn statements that they did under like completely benign conditions in like a hotel room somewhere with like 10 people recording them. That basically there's no way that this type of stuff like kind of like happens. Basically what they said is like the judge is like laying out rules for how they're going to like refer to before the points of the offense have been the points of the offense have been chosen. Like basically victim is a legal conclusion and they're going to let that like lay. And I will say that like maybe there is a chance that like the other words that they can use are similarly problematic, but also not problematic for what it was the Rittenhouse did. Like, right. So like the fact that they were alluding doesn't make it any better that he like shot them or like, you know, like that's what I'm saying. Like, it doesn't really matter. Whereas like the fact that you consider them victims is a legal conclusion that could like very much change like whether or not he gets a fair trial. And so I think Mike's point is basically, at the end of the day, the judge siding with Rittenhouse in this will mean that the trial goes more expeditiously, and that this is not a point that he can raise on appeal because this man is probably going to be convicted. And so like, and he will have like this is like, I think Mike's point is like, this is one less point to raise on appeal, is basically the idea that like, well, they decided this particular evidentiary issue in a way most favorable to the defendant. And so there's no way that he can come back if they still decide against his favor and like raise this as an issue. Does that make sense now?
Totally.
Does Paula still have questions? I don't know. If you want to rapture Paula in, I'm happy to like ask them.
I'm going to bring Paula in because she does have a question, but it's about procrastinating, which I also love.
Oh my God, you guys are ridiculous. Your question, I answered the poll, savory all day. Savory all day, all the time.
Me too. Me too.
But what did Jacob says prosecution can file a motion limiting what? I don't know what. Limiting
probably the.
I was not expecting my Twitter post to make it.
Listen, it's a slow news day, Paula. We do what we can over here at In Lieu of Fun to make some fun in lieu of news. So, but
your hair does look fabulous.
It does, and I just my like broader point, which I think this is what makes someone like Mike a great attorney, and you guys like this show really great, is because I've seen so many like blue checkmark people who are extremely liberal like just quote tweet it and say this is disgusting and this is why it's going to be appealed. And it's like, I know you want this person to be convicted, but saying that is like actually going to make the case go the opposite way. And I think it's important for us to like be able to be nuanced and like not think that just because someone has done something wrong, they don't deserve due process. And like it's like be putting expectations on Twitter, which is
I was just going to say, I feel like this is just as much you discovering the law as it is like you discovering how stupid the rest of the world actually is. And that like blue check marks are not like illegal, do not equate to illegal. And even when they do equate to a legal degree, people have bad legal takes all the time. I will say this, like,
But it does take like some amount of courage for someone like Mike to have answered, and Jacob to have answered my question, because like someone could just come out there on bad faith and say, well, you clearly don't want him to be convicted then.
Yes, but
like, because that's like, what people on Twitter
Paula,
do.
This is what we call not the law, but politics, and like just and just people like I don't like that virtue signaling got taken over by because I feel like everyone on both sides does it. So it's like, but it's just performative. Like all of it is performative, and it's about but it is about trying to signal something to your core group that like you're thinking about this in a certain way, and like I think that it's just as exhausting to constantly be feeling like obligated to have takes on things that are outrageous and happening in the world, so that like people around you know that you saw them and you had to have seen them, like know that you saw them and that you care about them, and that you're like showing them by retweeting or donating money or doing whatever that you saw. I don't know. So like, yeah, I would say as a general rule, people have a lot of bad takes on everything. And like, yeah, sorry, Paula, but you asked the right person. I'm glad you asked Mike Chase.
I figured, because I know he's a criminal defense lawyer, that would be the person I should tag. So my actual question is like, pre-pandemic, my favorite thing to do is like bake large quantities of like baked goods and then give them to people, because like first,
but now they're full of disease. Sorry. Yeah.
I don't know. It's just been like weird, because it's like been weird to like take something to someone and it's like, here, take all this food. But like, I know we're not having parties, or we can't like sit down and like share it. And it's like very weird to just sit in your home and bake all this stuff and then give it away or leave it on front porches.
You're going to do. Okay, I have a proposal, but first I feel like Genevieve was going to say something. What is Genevieve?
I was just going to say that goes to Kate's earlier point about moving on with life and like taking steps to be like that are rational. So I think sharing food that you know that you have been vaccinated and you are not diseased, and those people
like having COVID.
No, but you know what I'm saying. Like
people don't bring things and just leave them in like a room anymore.
Yeah, no,
that used to be a thing.
Sadly, I'm very sad that that's not the case.
There's
I think like people still.
Go ahead, Paula. Sorry.
Oh, I thought you were saying go ahead to the baby. I think like people are still not totally doing like fully like full blown like parties and stuff. And so like I can only like I can't take like 1 year I made like 5 pumpkin cheesecakes. Like I can't take 5 pumpkin cheesecakes to someone's house if they're not having.
I'm not gonna lie to you. That's like excessive anyway, but that's okay. I mean, like, was it what was it? Like, was it like a homeless shelter party? Like, I don't understand how you would end up eating that many cheesecakes.
No.
Like,
I made pumpkin puree myself. So I bought a pumpkin and cut it open and roasted it. And or baked it so that I could make like the pumpkin puree. And then I realized that's a lot of pumpkin. And so I had like 5 pumpkin pie cheesecakes at my house. And I also like found a recipe for a homemade whipped cream and made enough whipped cream for like 50 people.
Sounds delicious.
So I just had this, right?
I do want to say that, like, to your point though, I think you should pick up like needlepoint or like something like just, I want to get from Paul like a tiny little like needlepoint of like an emoji, and I just like want you to like or like something. I just like, maybe you can make it an emote and needlepoint it, or like just a swear word, and I can just like stick it right here next time I'm on cable news. And and like I kind of, but I'm actually kind of partly serious. Like there was a phase in my life, I think in the like my mid, like about 15 years ago, that like I just started like doing crochet and knitting instead of, because I just like I didn't have an office to go into anymore, and I couldn't like push baked goods on other people. And so I just transitioned, is what I'm trying to say. Is maybe it's take it as a sign of transit. It's a growth period.
Yes, I was going to say, so someone did try to teach me how to crochet. And what happened was I really couldn't figure it out. So I just kept going in a straight line, and I basically got like a 100-foot rope.
That's but if you're ever on like a desert island, think how useful that will be if you have thread and need a crochet chain.
And you can make a crochet hook very easily from like bamboo or like a reed. Like that's or something like that could
shark's
work.
Tooth.
Yes.
So like let's
the bamboo trees in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm like saying if you say imagine someday that you're trapped in an island with some FedEx packages and there's some string but no crochet hook, and now you'll just know. And so
I had like a weird fever dream one time that I was stuck on a desert island, but I was still getting Amazon deliveries. And why does that feel like that would still happen? Like I'd get my Prime deliveries, but no one would be able to get me off the island.
I mean, I would have believed that until the pandemic, when I actually stopped getting my Prime deliveries for like a very long time.
Ooh.
Was it anyone else like at the beginning of the pandemic for maybe like 1 day? I don't think it lasted longer than 1 day when you thought like, am I gonna like be able to get like stuff? Like, how does a pandemic work? Like, because the only thing that was going through your mind was like zombie movies.
Yeah.
And like, I think like we kept seeing those articles about like how there was never going to be like poultry or like beef on like the shelves again. And like just none of it really came to fruition. And you were like, I'm not built for like having to fight for food. Like that's just not going to happen. Like
I mean, I do think that there is like, I think that was everyone though, that was not just, that was everyone everywhere. No one knew what was happening.
I will say one final point. There is actually a huge problem now in England with their pork industry because of the shutdowns. And now they have all these pigs that have to be like emergency slaughtered and they can't really use it. And now they're importing meat from Europe, which is interesting. But Paula, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming on. And I'm going to rapture you back to the chorus.
Thank you for having me.
Reverend Dr. Hillary Livingston asked if I have seen arm knitting, and I have seen arm knitting. It's just like, so there's a few things about arm knitting, which is like this crazy, you basically take, what is it called? It's like but no, it's like the very thick, like kind of like unspun wool. That's just like literally
carded wool.
No, it's like,
that's not it.
Carded, but it's like it's in a very thick, like every piece is like a long kind of, and you can like use your hands as knitting needles to make this big kind of bouncy, kind of crazy looking,
they look like clouds.
Yeah, but like they do look like clouds. They're gorgeous, but one, the wool is super expensive, and two, it like pills really badly and kind of looks like shitty after like a short period of time, unless you take really, really, really good care of it and don't really touch it. So have you
done that? Because I mean, I would never. I can't keep anything wool in pristine condition ever.
No, it's difficult. It all kind of gets like that. Roving. Thank you, Rose. Like Rose. That is the term I was going to use. The other piece of news besides pandemic and Kyle Rittenhouse is like all of this stuff with Facebook, which I don't know. I know I do this for a living, but is everyone else kind of like perplexed at both how it's in the news every day and they're not quite sure what the story is?
Yes. And I was actually just going to say that it's an overload. There's a different facet every single day, and they're somewhat tangentially related, but it's all like trying to still diagnose the central issue. And how can everyone not know what the issue is?
Well, no, because this is super fascinating. So here is something that I think is kind of really crazy about this is that like, so normally how this type of stuff happens and how it did happen initially was that like the Wall Street Journal had all of these documents and they had Frances Haugen, like that was it. That is like a traditional type of leak model in which you have some type of scoop or some type of thing and you're reporting it out. And like, I mean, it's just kind of the same type of model that they had with Deep Throat and like in Watergate and everything else. But like if you had like imagine like Watergate was like all of a sudden Mark Felt decided that he was going to go and like he was like he'd given like most of the story and the head start, like Woodward and Bernstein. But now he was going to like basically give all of everything that he had shared with them and all of the background to 16, 17 news consortium agencies that are normally in competition with each other, and just like give them all of the exact same information that he had given like Washington Post, and then be like, okay, now you like, what are your versions of these stories? And so this is a super interesting kind of thing, because you don't actually know, like, you're not competing just for information, you're competing for takes on the information. And that is like really weird, because actually, as it turns out, that is actually how most of this goes. Like, it's not just competing on takes, but like, you don't realize how much information gets filtered into a take when you're reading the story. And so one of the things that I've been actively wondering as all this stuff happens and people like read this stuff is like whether or not the Wall Street Journal is going to like get called out for like potentially in some way or another, like overselling, like how they kind of packaged the material. I was like, and I don't think that's going to necessarily happen, but like, I was like, it occurred to me that could be something that happens. And like, you have people staring at the same documents, and one group at CNN sees one headline out of it and another person sees no headline out of it. And so like, what do people take away from that? It makes this really confusing news ecosystem in which kind of it eliminates the gatekeeper effect, but I can't tell whether it's good or bad. I'd like love to know your thoughts.
I think it's very physically representative of the actual Facebook issue. I mean, it's a mirror into the Facebook ecosystem, but it's happening on a large scale with different media outlets, which I think is really funny, because you have competition and it's still not solving your problem, because it's still the content that people are choosing to consume.
Completely. And there's been a number of stories which will go unnamed, but I have like clicked on the headline and been like, I didn't see that when I read through the documents. And then they pull up what the document said. And I'm like, I still don't see that with what you're citing to in these documents. And you're the only one saying it like this. And so it's very much kind of like, for me, I kind of actually oddly think that it is taken, I think it was like egalitarian and kind of fair. And I actually think it exposed to a certain extent the media more than probably like the whistleblower intended it to. Like, I think they probably were like, well, why, I'll just give this to everyone fairly. But like, I think that it makes some of the inner workings and the inconsistencies of media like really laid bare here, I think. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
No, but I agree with that. I also, it's such a, I apologize for how I'm going to phrase this, but it's annoying to me because it's a very serious issue. It's a substantive subject matter in and of itself, but it gets reduced down to, and so I always describe when I read things as like, I'll read something that's a little bit more substantive, and then I take a break and read something that I call like Twinkie literature. Like, it's not necessarily good for me, but I enjoy it. And it's like the news stories have become like Twinkie news stories where it's just clickbait. And that's the word I was trying to get to originally. It feels like real news, it becomes clickbaity, and I don't know how you get out of that, because you're still competing for eyes, you're competing for ads, you're competing for just the number of bodies you can get to look at your site, and the motivation is concerning.
So I think that like that's kind of part, like, as you said, it's a meta story on Facebook. This is kind of one of the things that I've been trying to say for a while, which is that this idea of like surveillance capitalism has never happened at this scale and like be able to use targeted ads in quite this way. But we've sold things by sensationalism and outrage for ad markets and advertising before. Like, that is in fact the entire model for journalism in like kind of the 20th century. And more than that, like, that made for a more egalitarian consumption of news, because if you were a bootblack or you were a banker, it cost 50 cents to buy it, like the New York Times. And so like, and the reason was because it was like everyone's they distributed the cost across eyeballs instead of like subscription fees. like this is like one of the reasons that people have issues with subscription fees. It's not because of people like you or me who can pay like $5 a month to the New York Times. It's like people that like didn't used to have kind of easy access to news generally.
They still kind of have that issue though, because
no,
like
of course they do.
you see the
there's like, this is like the idea of news deserts. This is the idea of people like kind of, it's absolutely true. And it's absolutely the idea around local journalism dying. That doesn't resolve any of those types of things. But my point is just that like the thing that seems crazy to me is kind of the idea that the media is not the only, like that there's also like that people keep having like, oh, the problem is targeted advertising, or the problem is that we're have this good that is made contingent upon an advertising monetization. But like that is actually not new or like interesting, except at scale. So like that's kind of one of the things.
And with how much information they're then collecting on you with your other interests, that I think is the distinguishing issue, because when the more traditional news outlets would have those media issue, the advertising platforms in and of themselves, that was something that seemed to be like a one-way deal, and now it's a mutual sharing of information. And maybe I'm overthinking that a little bit.
No, it's exactly right. It's exactly right.
A concerned
citizen.
Hi, how's it going?
Floor is yours.
I was wondering what your thoughts were about breaking up Facebook.
Yes. What are your thoughts about breaking up Facebook? Do you have any?
I'd be okay with it. People whose opinion I respect think it's a good idea and it makes sense. And there seems to be a function served through these antitrust actions. For example, I think Senator Warren said that Teddy Roosevelt broke up trusts because they were consolidating political power. So I think maybe that understanding applies to the modern situation with some of these big tech companies.
Yeah. So I think that I think that there's kind of like a mix here. So I'll kind of start from the beginning. So first of all, in order to kind of use antitrust in a breakup capacity, there's a couple of ways that works. One is that it can happen at the pre-merger level, like to get approval for a merger, and you can say, no, you're gonna have to break off this or this in order to get this merger. Like we're gonna like make you have that kind of structural solution to your business model. And we'll get into that in a second. But generally when people say break them up, when they think of Standard Oil or they think of kind of like these types of monopoly structures, they're talking about a remedy in antitrust, and there are many remedies in antitrust, and structural antitrust is the breakup method, and that is like only one possible remedy in antitrust. The problem with structural breakup is that there are there's a lot of problems with it, and I'll get to those in a second. So like, let's assume that we're aiming for breaking them up because we think it's going to serve our functions in any type of way, but like, which I don't think it does. And so we'll get to that in a second. But first, I'm just going to say that from a really basic walking, and this is like just from what I've been working on for the past 6 months, kind of delving into antitrust. I am not an antitrust expert, so I could be like wrong around the edges slightly about this, but like I generally like the general idea is that when you start an antitrust action, it can come from a bunch of different places. But if it comes from kind of the SEC and you're kind of driving this complaint and you think that there are uncompetitive practices and all of these other things, one of the main things, and one of the over time has become like maybe a little bit too solidified as like the single thing to kind of prove monopoly or antitrust power, is that you have is that like you can tell that there have been anti-competitive practices because the consumer price index on a certain product has gone up. Mm-hmm. And the majority of the product is served by that one, is like provided by only that one firm. And so basically the first question of antitrust is like, what is the market? You define the market however it is that you want to define it. It's typically substitutable goods, but that is like a very narrow market. And it's also very hard to kind of define. You have to define it by geography these days and all these other things. Once you define it, you have to show market share. How do you show market share? Then you have to, like, again, kind of decide whether or not you've drawn the lines of the market in the right place, because then it's going to depend on, like, well, most of YouTube, for example, is like user content, user to user content, but some of YouTube is like an increasing amount of YouTube is like commercial content. And so, like, okay, well, what is the market of YouTube then? Is the market share that you're interested in for YouTube the commercial content or the user generated content, or is it not? Like, you don't think that distinction is worth making? Mm-hmm. And you'd have to make all of these arguments to a judge. Then at some point you have to prove that it's that their control is anti-competitive, or like, and that would involve consumer price index. But the problem, or would, at least in a Borkian kind of like Chicago school of antitrust, the general idea is that, like, and that Lena Khan brings in, is like, that is like a very outmoded concept. Pegging things to like consumer price index is too narrow, doesn't touch on the necessary impact, and this I agree with her on completely, doesn't touch on the necessary versions of like consumer welfare that we have now, which are innovation and price quality and like other types, or sorry, not price quality, but quality of the product and service and things like that. And so we have to come up with a more holistic indicator other than just price, especially when we're talking about these tech products that we pay for with our eyeballs and not with our pocketbooks. And so, that being said, that take that Lena has, like that argument that she has, the neo-Brandeisian view, like the anti-Chicago school view of antitrust, is not the law right now, nor is it like poised to not be the law right now. It is like very entrenched in like in the black letter law of antitrust.
And was that Brandeisian view prior to the Chicago school taking over the current law, or is it kind of just a thought process that hasn't really been utilized as like a mechanism?
Yeah, I would say that like a lot of it goes back and forth. Like, a lot of people think that the neo-Brandeisian view starts in like the progressive era, and like slowly it's drummed out by like the 70s and the rise of like the Chicago School of Law and Economics. But like, I think that Lena and others make their argument in reaching for that is like, this is what it used to be, so let's call back to those roots. And like, they think that they argue that makes their argument more sympathetic or useful. I don't disagree with any of that. It's just kind of like, neither here nor there, because as I said, the law is just like not in a position to look at to define the markets that these social media companies are in. If they can define the markets, it's almost like facilely bad. Like, it's just not facilely. It's almost like it's like a joke. They literally, like, right now the FCC complaint like calls social media companies, like, it doesn't include TikTok because it's not in the US. That's not true. Like, it includes MySpace, Orkut. It doesn't include LinkedIn because LinkedIn isn't about personal connections or anything.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, it doesn't include LinkedIn because LinkedIn is personal connections. It doesn't include Twitter because Twitter is actually not social media according to like the FCC filing. It is actually, it is a one-to-one broadcasting network, and there are no communities, and you don't go there to socialize or like have connections with your friends. It does not include YouTube because YouTube is a broadcast network. It lumps YouTube and Hulu and Netflix all together, even though YouTube is predominantly like user to user. So this is what I mean by like, these are just so to not to like completely go off, but to a concerned citizen's point, like I don't really know is probably like 99% of people who kind of come to this. We have these vague, very like blue check mark Twitter takes that are like, wow, I'm gonna steal that, Paula, of like people being like, it feels like a monopoly, so I feel like they have a lot of power and like they're really big, and so we should break them up. But like, there is a very compelling take on like, they're huge, but that doesn't actually mean they're not facing competition from other outside firms, and it doesn't mean that they're not. All of this being said, I think that there are I don't think we can get to like antitrust. Like, I don't think we can prove an antitrust case where the law is currently. Okay. Like, I just don't think it'll likely hold. But like, if you did want to use antitrust, it shouldn't be structural breakup, which doesn't actually really get to any of the things that bother us about these companies. It should be like interoperability, which is like doing things like they did with the AOL Time Warner merger, which I mentioned in the show before, which is like you break off and make open source one small feature of the platform that keeps people there, and you like accelerate, I think, like an amount of like natural evolution and selection around like the social hot norms drink of the
no, it's true.
but it is, you accelerate it. You're just like, you're not going to control this. This is the part that is like pushing society forward. Let's keep it going. And that, like, for example, instant messenger was that thing for AOL. It eventually like murdered AOL. Like AOL died a slow death because they broke off instant messenger, and then instant messenger itself became a useless medium because now we just text message. And so like the whole technology, it's like nothing is like set in glass, like basically like it all keeps evolving. The whole point is like to keep it evolving and not to have it stagnate in these types of like pools of evolution. So anyways,
do you also think that there's a danger in labeling a market leader as a monopoly without it being a true monopoly? Like, that's another thing. I mean, we're uncomfortable with the amount of power that this company has and the amount of information this company has. But one of the things in our conversation, I think it was with Tim yesterday, when referenced, oh my gosh, I just totally brain farted.
I love how much you're brain farting, because like I feel like I'm constantly sitting on this show and being like, I can't think of words, like basic words.
It's exhausting, the brain farting. But it was to the point. I'll think of it in a second. But I would like to hear your thoughts on just like labeling market leaders as monopolies and if there's a danger there.
It's just not very. I remember he said like Donald Trump starts his own platform whenever he wants to. Like, obviously they're not a monopoly, and like he kind of said that point. Like,
regulation is him and Ben were talking about how regulation is what the market leader wants, and how that could actually create a monopoly in and of itself. That was one point. Yeah.
Yes, that is like that is 100%. And so like that is also why I'm kind of like, wow, if anyone spent 10 seconds understanding these things, they would realize that Section 230 reform or repeal would actually be counterproductive to any of the things that like Zephyr Teachout, Tim Wu, like Lena Khan, like these like new progressives that are trying to stir up the structural antitrust would like actually be for, because it would actually have the effect of solidifying the top dogs in the market already and blocking more competition. So it's very weird to me when I see people like promoting both of those ideas simultaneously, because I just don't think that they have, like a nuanced sense of how it's going to play out. Sorry if that was too long an answer to the antitrust question.
No,
I'm also practicing explaining it. Hi, Daniel.
Hello. So I am curious what you guys think about the accidental shooting on the Rust film set, and in particular, where is the legal exposure going to lie?
I'm not like bouncing because I'm excited about the shooting. I'm bouncing because like I've been reading about this kind of obsessively. Okay, Genevieve, you go first. I'll be right back.
No, I can't, because I haven't read obsessively. I just think it's a tragic accident. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So from everything that I can tell, it just sounds like negligence. It just sounds like it's going to be a lot about what the industry standards are as they're written down, whether they were followed to the letter, what the custom. Oh, do you remember this from Rich v. Genn? The custom of the industry is like, it really will be like, is the custom, like this will come up, like is the custom of the industry moved away from what the written standards are, such that we're going to respect the custom of like how people do these things or not? I mean, likely answer no, because the insurance and everything else and all of this stuff is going to, levels of liability will probably be more convincing since it's formalized and written down. But there will be kind of counter argument to that effect. I imagine evidence presented. I think that basically I don't know how insurance runs on film sets. So this is like a really interesting thing. Like, I don't know whether armorers carry their own, or like prop people carry their own insurance. And so like at the end of the day, what becomes really of interest here, and this is the dorkiest, like most in the weeds answer to your question, Daniel, and I'm sorry, is really interesting. It's going to come down to the classification of what those people are in employment law, and whether or not they are like respondeat superior, or like what, whether or not like there was some type of dominant hand control from like the greater film agency, and like and whether there was negligence and lack of care in like deciding how these people were hired, or deciding how they ran their set, or whether everything was followed to the letter and like it really came down to just this one person's screw up. And I think that like that's going to be fascinating, because it's going to all be about passing the buck for the woman who died, and the woman and the man who was shot. Like, it's going to be basically about like damages. Like, you can't do anything else. It's going to be about damages, and like that individual armorer is like the most cost provider. Like, he is obviously like the but for cause between it, but like the least cost provider is his parent company, if that is actually like us, like if that is actually the case, and they're insured. And so there's basically will be, I imagine, kind of like a battle of whose insurance company pays for what, and there might just end up being a settlement. I would put 95% on something like that. The deepest pockets are the film company, and the film company's insurer. Like, I just want to also say it's the film. Wait, I thought that there was an armorer who was a guy. That the guy that said cold gun.
I have no idea.
Okay. Anyways, whatever. I can't, like, I don't know what that people's titles are, but I know that there was a guy that was apparently in charge of like all of the stuff, and said cold gun and put it down, and like didn't check. But anyway,
the other thing that I think is so crazy is how this story is becoming politicized too. I mean, you see the reactions from individuals who are of a certain political persuasion seem to be reveling in it, and it's kind of awful. I mean, it is awful, not kind of awful, but it's just also shocking that like this is what we're choosing to politicize now. Like how and like frankly, like how does this serve your platform also?
Yeah, no, it's not like.
No, I mean, if anything, it just actually would undermine the position on like a lot of the Second Amendment stuff. That I mean, this is even a projectile that's theoretically not supposed to be deadly, so you could have greater. I mean, I don't know. Again, the brain, the sleep deprivation is real.
Yeah, no, I think it's time to wrap up.
Yes,
We've managed to muddle our way through another episode of In Lieu of Fun. Go and get some sleep. Hang in there. I'm going to get your address, and I'm going to send you some apple peeling kit stuff. And yeah.
Thank you. And I also appeal to everyone, literally appeal. The dad jokes are really on a whole nother level now. For recipes, please, because I still have so many. And be careful, Kate. I may send you some.
Oh, good. I love that.
I will. So today we will be back. We have 2 minutes. But I think
we'll be 23 hours and 58 minutes, or 2 minutes from now. No, 23 hours and 2 minutes from now.
Yes, we'll be back. And until then, Kate.
We have lots of apples and little sleep. Bye, Genevieve.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.